players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Mystic Forge, Khan the Great Creator, the One Ring, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they will have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and TheEpicStorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Eminence Gaming.
Hello, and welcome to episode 102 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Adapt or Die. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU.
I am Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll.
And I am Bryant Cook of the Epic Storm.
Shout out to our new patron members and YouTube members. We got Mutant8, Adam, Valkyrie99, and Sean541. Thank you to our new subscribers. And if you're on the fence, this is how we keep this podcast going. So check out those things that Phil just said.
And speaking of keeping this podcast going, thank you very much to Eminence Gaming for sponsoring this episode. If you're interested in running an event or want your LGS to do so, but are worried about the logistics of it, check out Eminence Gaming's Command Tower software. You can create and manage 4-player or 1v1 tournaments easily, and its unique pairing system ensures you don't get paired against the same players multiple times. Visit eminence.events for details. Now, let's go ahead and set the stage for this episode. Last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago, in our previous episode, we talked about the bangers of the Lord of the Rings set, and kind of how they were slotting into legacy decks initially and which ones were actually good, with a focus primarily on Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring. Well, now we have 2 weeks of data, results, testing, and we're going to talk about how Legacy is changing, because this set is having a massive impact on Legacy and is going to be changing a lot of paradigms and heuristics that you might be used to from old Legacy days.
Yeah, we kind of saw Orcish Bowmasters coming. Like, obviously, Legacy is a format built on cantrips, and that kind of changed the rules of engagement. We have two other cards that we did mention in our last episode, but now that we have some time playing with and against them, really changed kind of the rules and how the format moves. And in addition to Bowmasters, we have the One Ring and Fourth Aerlingus, both of which have completely changed both Stompy decks and control decks, and even some combo decks. They're affecting multiple archetypes on multiple fronts.
All right, so let's start out with the Bow Boys. Maybe let's kind of group this into a couple of sections. Let's start with cantrips. Brian, how have you changed playing with cantrips since this has been printed? Are you changing the timing of your brainstorms? Are you more afraid to cast ponders? How have things changed in that basic regard?
Kind of a 1v1 situation of ponder is in my hand and brainstorm is in my hand, and my opponent has 2 open mana. I'm likely to cast the ponder first. Obviously, all of this is contextual, but generally you want to brainstorm first, hit the fetch land, then crack that fetch land to cast ponder, and that sees the most cards, and you get the most control over what you see. I want to put the ponder on the stack, and I just take 1 extra if they have Bowmasters, and then I can respond to the Bowmaster with the brainstorm, which is not how I would like to sequence my cantrips anyway. And as far as not just the spell cantrips, but cards that replace themselves when they arrive, I think Baleful Strix went from one of my favorite cards to cast to just complete crap immediately. Just it lines up so poorly against Bowmasters. Staff of the Storyteller, a card I was very excited about in all sorts of shells. I think that card is pretty bad now too. And those were two archetype defining cards. Jeskai was built around Staff, and Grixis and Bug were built around Strix, and I think those cards are just kind of bad now.
So I recently recorded with an Esper Vile deck list, and excuse me, I'm going to have to look up the full name of this card. It was featuring one of the versions of Samwise, but there's a couple. Featuring Samwise the Stout-Hearted, which is a 2/1 with Flash. When it ETBs, you can choose up to one target permanent card in your graveyard that was put there from the battlefield this turn, return it to your hand, the ring tempts you. And I started playing this deck, and it had Baleful Strix, and Samwise, and Recruiter of the Guard, and Lauren, and I really enjoyed playing this deck for a few minutes, and then I got paired against Orcish Bowmasters 3 or 4 times throughout the league, and all of my cards just got obliterated. It is going to change your evaluation of creatures within this format immensely. Brian, are you excited to sleeve up Fairy Mastermind anymore?
I'm not, Phil. I gotta tell you. I have goofed around with it alongside Bowmasters in the same deck, where you just have 8 ways to beat up on a cantrip for 2 mana, and your opponent is never safe. I did kind of enjoy that, but when 8 slots in your deck are Bowmasters and Fairy Mastermind, your opponent's Bowmasters are pretty freaking good. It's a tough time to be an X1 in this format. And I've queued into multiple Dryad Arbor decks in this past 2 weeks of grinding, and let me tell you how many of those I've just killed. Put it right in the graveyard. Nice Green Sun Zenith. Your shit is dead. Cool. Sinkhole. +2 power in play. Go. Rough. It's rough to be that sort of deck right now.
I also have been changing my play patterns with Orcish Bowmaster. Yesterday I recorded a Doomsday League. I get paired against Esper Scam. My opponent goes turn 1 Underground Sea, go. Turn 2 Fetch Land, go. And I'm like, so you got the hand that does nothing the first 2 turns? I was like, obviously you have a Bowmaster, so I'm not going to play my Brainstorm. I pass, they play 3rd land, go. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to sit on this Brainstorm. We played a full another turn cycle before they decided to break and then cast the Bowmaster. And then I just responded with double Brainstorm. It was Fetch, Brainstorm, Fetch, Brainstorm, Fetch, or whatever. But like, you do have to just like acknowledge that people keep hands for a reason. And if your opponent is not doing anything, or they're making weird decisions, they're probably sitting on a Bowmaster waiting to get you. You should try to not give them a 4/4.
Every time I think of a play pattern like that, I think of the Collected Company era in Standard. A bunch of cards ended up banned out of that Standard format, but I just remember Patrick Sullivan and Cedric Phillips on SCG coverage just hamming it up anytime somebody played their 4th land and passed the turn. And the two just had this running gag where they're like, oh, that's so unlucky. You just didn't have a 4-drop? Wow, just passing the turn in your creature deck without a play on 4 mana? Wow, that sucks. And they just really hammed it up every time that happened. And it's Collected Company. In Legacy, passing with 2 up. Cool. Bowmasters, I see it. You might as well just main phase it, because your opponent can see it. You're not going to get anyone with that.
There is one thing that I have not figured out yet, which is I am primarily at this point a bauble gamer. I play 8 baubles in the Epic Storm, and I haven't figured out the perfect timing yet. Like, I know a lot of the times when I want to use the baubles, but there's a weird dynamic with Orcish Bowmasters because it's a black card, right? And in black matchups, I've been teaching myself the last year or so, I want to bauble on their turn, so that way they can't discard the cards that I'm then going to draw. Well, now if you wait to bauble on their turn, they get to Orcish Bowmasters you. So there's a weird tension in how you should be using your cantrips right now. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just this is the new world. We need to solve it.
There's going to be some really interesting changing of evaluations of cards. So for example, say you're playing Death and Taxes, you're on the draw, you play a turn 1 Mother of Runes. That is a card that just dies to Orcish Bowmasters now, and you're going to have to reevaluate how good cards like that are going to be within your shell. And if you had an opening like a Mom into Thalia, that's a generically good opening. Is that true anymore? Maybe not.
It's time to call up Stepmom with that 2 booty.
That's a bad Legacy card. But yeah, that is the type of thing that we're talking about here. Have some, like, the next part of this, we kind of structured our notes as these are the changes and then how do we apply them. But I think we have a natural flow here to talk about an application since Bryant brought up the 2 toughness. A deck that I really like and recently had some success with, Cephalid Breakfast, is built on resolving and protecting an X1 2-drop and trying to draw a bunch of cards to set up your combo. Seems like Orcish Bowmasters would line up perfectly against that. And what I've found in my testing since the card was legal, although it was technically legal in the tournament I won, but nobody had them yet, but now that it's out there, is when you're shoving your combo, that combo was already built to beat Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Pyroblast, and Bowmasters cost twice as much as those things. So I'm not worried about Bowmaster as a removal spell. What I'm worried about is if the first combo gets stuffed, like if they have the 2 forces or if they have Bowmaster with force backup or whatever, and then what you have to settle into that cantrip, Staff of the Storyteller, grind back in and present a second combo game, which Breakfast was really good at. Bowmasters farms you in that phase of the game. So I'm thinking Stoneforge Mystic, 1/2 creature, grab Cauldra, just disrespect that Bowmasters, trample right over the top of it. Brazen Borrower was the main deck removal spell of choice in my Baltimore list, and the previous iteration before that had 2 Swords to Plowshares in the main. Maybe it's time to revisit Swords to Plowshares. Maybe it's time to revisit Stoneforge Mystic and just sort of use this existing technology to respect the card.
I did something kind of wild, and I played a Death and Taxes league with Chrome Mox instead of Aether Vial, and a minimal number of X1s, like running Ancient Tomb in the deck list to try to run Hate Bears like Archon of Emeria and Anointed Peacekeeper that just have higher toughness to go and play around Orcish Bowmasters preemptively. The league was a little wild because I was asked to run 4 copies of the One Ring, which is maybe a little dubious in Death and Taxes, but playing the big booty creatures felt good. I played Draw Go against an opponent who clearly had Orcish Bowmasters in their hand for something like 10 turns before they finally gave up, played it, and then I just removed it and played out the X1, like the couple of X1s that were sitting in my hands. And that play pattern felt very good for me.
Phil, there's actually a name for that deck. It's the Initiative. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it was a pretty popular Legacy deck a couple months ago.
Yeah. I think ultimately, what I was trying out is just going to be better as an Initiative deck with copies of the One Ring. But I think trying to play alternative, larger creatures is going to be a good thing if you're trying to force D&T. I don't necessarily like the black-white D&T builds that are running around that are just splashing Orcish Bowmasters. It does things, but I just got my ass kicked by opposing Orcish Bowmasters deck still because I had too many X1s.
I think that is the best version of D&T to exist against combo. Having Bowmasters alongside 4 Thoughtseize I thought was actually very effective. So now you have another 1-drop that isn't exactly Deafening Silence that's relevant. And you don't have to play super narrow cards like Mindbreak Trap because Thoughtseize is just widely applicable. So I do think that's nice, but I also don't know if combo's so good in the format right now that you necessarily need to do that. But maybe Bowmasters is the key that they need. I don't know.
That sort of thing will be very good against, say, the Paradox Engine One Ring deck, right? Thoughtseize, take them off their first play, then drop a Spirit or a Bowmasters or whatever and make their life a little bit more miserable. That is going to be very good in those sorts of situations.
I know that Brian mentioned Baleful Strix previously, and I've been having this thought in my head, and we're just sort of freeforming here, but Icefang Coatl and Baleful Strix are both cards that are very good at stealing the Initiative that we just mentioned, but also Monarch. Right now, there's a very, very, very popular card that gives you the Monarch. But I think that maybe this is the first time where those cards actually aren't good at stealing the Monarch. Because with 4th Aerlingus, Phil, you can correct me however you want. That's how I say it. But your Icefang Coatl or Baleful Strix is just going to get overrun because they're usually making multiple creatures and being bad versus Bowmasters. I think we're sort of in a unique era of Legacy where those cards are just kind of stinky and not even good at doing the job that they used to.
Palace Jailer was a very popular, very strong card for a long time. Stoneblade, Blue-Eye Control style decks were playing it because it was a very reasonable way to snowball a game. And then we started seeing those evasive creatures, especially ones with flash that would take that. But yeah, you were just talking about before we went live a screenshot of 4th Aerlingus for X equals 10 being cast. Good luck taking over the game with your Icefang Coatl against that. Even if you do it for half of that, for 5, even for 4, that's so much power. And a lot of times, to hold the Initiative or Monarch these days, you need to do something get in with a creature, take it, board wipe, hope they don't have another thing that can take it afterwards. Because, man, the second, fourth Aerlingas for a decent X number is disgusting.
I gotta say, I read the card, obviously, and I've seen it cast and indexed before, but fourth Aerlingus, the first time you actually play against that card, and your opponent just, even for 5 mana, just X equals 3's that thing, and then they have 3 2/2 haste tramples, and they have the Monarch, and those 2/2 haste tramples don't go anywhere. Because all other Magic cards in the history of the game that have text like this are like, and those tokens die at the end of turn. And these ones just don't. They're in there. The Knights, they stay. And it's like, for the same price as the Wandering Emperor, you instead of 1 2/2 Vigilance, you get 2 2/2 haste tramples and the initiative. It's bonkers. Like mopping up after that, and the things, they keep trample. It's not even like make X 2/2s. They gain haste and trample until end of turn. It's they just have those words. They're gonna keep trampling. They're gonna take the Monarch and they're gonna keep it. And if they can't keep it, they're gonna take it right back. That card is messed up.
Super efficient cantripping fireball that leaves bodies. It feels good. Also, it imprints under Chrome Mox for 2 different colors, which is definitely relevant in the Red-White Initiative deck if you're playing it there.
Seems bonkers that the card isn't even XX. It's just, remember when Entreat the Angels was a legacy win condition? Look at that next to Fourth Aerlingas, and you're just like, what has happened to sorcery speed make a token creatures before? Phil Bleckman, who is editing this pod, probably screaming, crying, shitting his pants, just hearing us talk about this. What'd it do?
What up, everybody? Force-a-Phil here. Everybody started calling me Fourth-a-Phil for some reason, so I went and I read the card, and I am absolutely screaming, crying, shitting my pants.
It takes the Monarch. That's what it do. There's a new what it do in town, Fourth Aerlingus. It even loops better with Mystic Sanctuary. It's messed up. This is a paradigm shifter for sure.
Not that I'm a Narset player, but if I was a Narset player, I'd be thinking a lot right now about if I should actually be playing that card. So previously in the last week of my playing Legacy Leagues, I've seen a lot of bad deck building, playing Narset alongside Orcish Bowmasters or Hull Breacher alongside Orcish Bowmasters. Those things generally don't go well together, but also, like, imagine trying to defend Narset versus Fourth Aerlingas right now. It's just incredibly difficult, and if the control mirrors are going to be about that, maybe Narset isn't the card you should be playing.
I'm going to take that one a step further. I'm going to do what might be a hot take. I think Planeswalkers are close to unplayable in Legacy. So take something like Liliana of the Veil. Like, let's start with a lower end Planeswalker. Liliana of the Veil minuses to Edict, leaving Liliana at 1 loyalty. Just imagine how poorly that lines up versus something like Orcish Bowmaster. Okay, minus I get your Orc token, your Orcish Bowmaster kills Liliana. Or minus your opponent flashes in Orcish Bowmasters, loses the token, pings Liliana, and protects the thing that you were trying to get rid of in the first place. And I think between the One Ring, which we'll talk about in a minute, being another great mid-range / control card, Fourth Earlingas offering haste and go wide ability of protecting Planeswalkers, and Bowmasters pinging them. I don't want to be using mana on Planeswalkers except in a couple of niche scenarios with maybe like Grist in a Fiend Artisan Shell or something.
Yeah, I think there are 3 playable Planeswalkers in Legacy right now, and they are Teferi and Minskin but only if you're casting them off Delighted Halfling. I think that is a whole archetype that needs its own respect. Turn 2 Teferi, turn 3 Minskin is still going to GG anyone. And the third Planeswalker that is worth playing is the One Ring.
Yeah, that's fair. People
used to joke Deathrite Shaman's a 1 mana Planeswalker. Well, the One Ring is Jace the Mind Sculptor. The One Ring is better than Narset. The One Ring, I've even played like Sorin the Mirthless in decks as a non-pyroblastable source of card advantage. One Ring invalidates all of those cards. And if you thought Jace the Mind Sculptor was powerful, imagine if you could Dark Ritual into it. Imagine if Ancient Tomb City of Traders cast it. Imagine if Karn could wish for it. Imagine if non-blue decks could just play it. That's actually what we're talking about with the One Ring. It's kind of like Uro in the play pattern of once your opponent taps their 4 mana and resolves their thing, you're way behind. Except unlike Uro, it doesn't go through the graveyard, requires no setup, not susceptible to graveyard hate, not susceptible to creature removals or Pyroblast or Karakas or anything, and every freaking deck can play it. The One Ring is nuts.
In the last 2 weeks, I have not recorded a single video that did not contain either Orcish Bowmasters or the One Ring. And that's not just me from like content creator perspective trying to, farm views on the new flashy stuff. That's like Legacy has changed. Your deck needs to upgrade, probably using these cards or to at least prepare against them.
Remember 3 months ago, that's just a wild guess, but we were like, what's going to replace Expressive Iteration? Is it going to be Reckless Impulse? It was the One Ring.
It's been a turbulent, sorry to interrupt, Phil, but I want to just riff on what Bryant just said, because and by we, I mean honest control and mid-range players, had a renaissance. We got Staff of the Storyteller. We got Fairy Mastermind. EI was banned. The world was our oyster. It was so exciting. After living our entire lives without Jeskai having a playable 2-drop, suddenly we had multiple to select from. And then here's this. Here's the One Ring. And now every deck has a better Planeswalker than your blue deck does. And you have to keep up with it somehow. And racing it is very difficult because it gives protection from everything when it arrives. It's a tough time.
I'm not normally the biggest blue mage, but there is one other card that has caught my eye from being on the other side of the table of it, and that is Sauron's Ransom. 1 blue and a black for an instant. Choose an opponent. They look at the top 4 cards of your library and separate them into a face down and a face up pile. You put one pile into your hand and the other into the graveyard, and the ring tempts you. I have seen this as sort of an instant speed, air quotes, draw 2 that avoids Orcish Bowmasters while being something reasonable to loop back with Mystic Sanctuary a little bit later. Have you all encountered this? If so, what are your thoughts on it?
I have encountered it, and it's extra busted on Magic Online, where you're not sure which pile you're making. Maybe it defaults to like the piles are presented in the order that they're listed on the card, but it doesn't clearly markate face down pile, face up pile. It just gives you 2 boxes to move cards around in. That was my experience.
It does. It's on the left side in small letters.
Great. Yeah, my opponent cast this card. 2 boxes appeared. The 4 cards I saw were Ponder, Brainstorm, Uro. And I was like, well, I don't want them to know they could just put these Uros in the graveyard for free. How do I stack this? And then I just freaking guessed at which one was which. Maybe I didn't look close enough, but that was miserable. But as far as actually resolving the card, this card does seem sweet. This is a mini game. It can be better than a 2-for-1, especially if you have graveyard synergy like Uro. This is a very powerful card, and any instant speed effect is worth looking at.
Just in case this hasn't been said on this pod before, by the way, when the ring tempts you and you choose a ring bearer, that thing does become legendary. So Caracas gamers, you can live the dream of bouncing a Murktide Regent or something every once in a while.
I won't lie, this whole conversation has me wondering if I should be playing or trying out at least 4th Aerolingus as a Burning Wish target. I think I have something to do tonight after we're done recording.
And genuinely, yes, I think. If you've ever in your life cast Ave Progenitor Ooze as a storm outlet, 4th Aerolingus is probably just better than that.
Also, this is very reasonable once your opponent has boarded out removal spells, right? Like, if you're on, I will win with my 1 copy of 4th Aerolingus in my deck eventually. Like, haha, I have made 3 knights. Good luck, idiot, is totally legit if you're also the Monarch.
But also, if you're a Storm gamer, removal people keep in, they keep in is like deal 1 to all creatures. Okay, my knights take 1. You know what I mean? What is it called? The one that destroys a creature with Defender, an artifact, or deals 1 to everything, crash into something?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I forget the name of the card, though.
But Delver players have been playing that recently.
One thing that's interesting about both Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring is it fits into every archetype. You are fine playing those cards if you are control, combo, mid-range, tempo, stompy, whatever. The cards just have the raw power level that they are acceptable. You can play Orcish Bowmaster combo where you try to wheel your opponent and kill them. I've seen Reanimator decks playing Bowmaster in their sideboard, oftentimes alongside something like Sheoldred or Dalthy Voidwalker to just give you a man plan that doesn't rely on you executing your combo to get wins. The One Ring is slotting into control decks. It has its own dedicated combo deck. Initiative decks are just going and playing it out. These cards are ubiquitously powerful and utilizable.
Yeah, I got really hard the first time I paired into Reanimator after Bowmasters was readily available. Like, I know they've been juking. They've been switching into Dalthy Voidwalker out of the sideboard, and kind of Reanimator's plan for the last few months has been a moving juke where the deck can be Reanimator, it can be Show and Tell, or it can be Dothy Voidwalker Beatdown. And usually after board, it's some combination thereof, and you have to whack-a-mole it. I played against a Reanimator player who may genuinely not have had Entomb and Reanimate in their deck anymore after sideboard, and I saw Orcish Bowmaster, Dothy Voidwalker, and Oppo Agent, and that was just not a deck I was prepared to play against.
There is the Reanimator list that won 2 different challenges in the last month or so that just boarded into Black-White Initiative post-board.
I saw that one.
Talking about the One Ring, when you are playing it in a fair way, you need a way to get rid of the One Ring or otherwise mitigate the life loss if you are planning on keeping it around for a while. So some things people have been doing, some people will Teferi bounce it to reset the loyalty. Commonly, you just find another one and play it to reset the number of counters on it. Shouldered is very cute with the One Ring, so you gain 2 life every time you draw a card, and the One Ring will gain you more life than you are losing. I had a game where I had to Liliana ultimate myself to get rid of the One Ring because it was going to kill me. So make sure you are having a plan for getting rid of the One Ring if you can't just utilize, 2 or 3 turns to just kill your opponent. The slower your deck is at ending the game, the more incidental life gain or ways you need to get rid of or bounce the One Ring you do need.
This is not a meme, and I alluded to this last episode, I believe, about cards that exile artifacts that are playable in Legacy. We recently gained Cast Into the Fire. There's obviously 4 mana for Prismatic Ending. Was Wizards, when they released that terrible article about Leyline Binding, so far into the tank that they were thinking about the One Ring? Is that our playable savior? Because honestly, outside of Teferi Bounce and stuff like that, there isn't a whole lot that sees play that answers the One Ring.
Haywire Might is a good one. That one got me the other day. I kept an all in the One Ring hand, and that just came down on turn 1 and shit on my day.
You can also just Pithing Needle it, and any deck can play that. That comes out of Urza Saga packages as well. There are reasonable answers to it. It's also a 4 mana spell. Maybe we're just have not innovated our way back around to Spell Pierce yet. Just the answers to stuff. I've seen a lot of Spell Snares. I've seen a lot of Stern Scoldings. A lot of people respecting Bowmaster right now. And the One Ring is just sort of flying off the top rope to end the game over all this silly soft permission, and make Spell Pierce great again. That might be a place to explore. But Prismatic Ending for 4 is obviously something I'm excited about. I've been saying since that card was printed that 4th pip, whether you're a full 4-color deck, or even if you can just randomly generate a treasure in your 3-color deck, or you have Carpet of Flowers, or if you have any peripheral access to that 4th pip, Prismatic Ending goes through the roof.
There's also Triomes. There's a lot of cards.
Right, exactly.
One thing about playing Spell Pierce, though, is I think it does create feel-bads when you're facing the Bowmaster decks and you're just sitting there dying to Orcs with a Spell Pierce in your hand. But we're at a point right now where both Bowmaster and the One Ring are literally everywhere, and you have to pick and choose what you want to be, and also, that's what your sideboard's for.
And Cast in the Fire beats them both. Ping ping on the Bowmaster and the army, or Exile the Ring. Seems almost like somebody in R&D maybe thought about that, and they were like, how can we put a common answer to these 2 busted rares into our set? All jokes aside, I don't think Legacy is unwell enough that we're main decking Cast Into the Fire, but that is a clean answer to either one of these things.
Well, you don't have to necessarily main deck it, but I'm not even seeing a whole lot of Cast Into the Fires in the sideboards. I've seen a couple in the sideboards of Delver, but not even all of them. Do you think more people should be playing it as someone who would actually play the card?
Maybe, probably. I've been putting it into any sideboard that can cast it lately with my brewing. I think it's worth exploring. I like the space. The real squeeze here, though, is kind of the reality of numbers, because we all feel bad when we get BTFO'd by the hot new card. And I had a coaching session the other day about someone who's just like, I've been on this deck for 6 months. I'm very proud of my results and what I've made out of the deck, but I cannot beat Bowmasters and I think the deck is dead. And then we actually looked at the numbers, and obviously MTG Goldfish, incomplete information, etc., asterisks on anything that comes out of Goldfish, but looking at the Goldfish Legacy metagame, only 3.5 of the top 15 decks actually had Bowmaster in them, and those decks represented 16% of the field. So if you're like Bowmasters everywhere, I'm going to main deck Cast Into the Fire, or some really niche answer, I'm going to main deck Plague Engineer. That's just blank against 84% of decks you're going to play against. And it's in a spot where there was a period where every black deck was playing Bowmasters and every deck that wasn't playing black was splashing black for Bowmasters. And we've left that, and it's kind of settling into places where it actually should be and makes sense in as far as what decks want to be doing, and kind of giving it that time to settle. And then what natural answers do you have? Are you a lightning bolt deck? Can you pick off Bowmasters and then deal with the 1/1 army somehow? We're not at main deck Cast Into the Fire. We're just not there. We're not even close.
I think in the challenge events we are seeing, the percentage of Bowmasters is extremely high. Like, I think it was like surgical extraction levels of played in the showcase challenge. I know PVDH tweeted out the exact numbers, but I think it was something like Orcish Bowmasters was in 30% of decks in the Legacy Showcase challenge, for example.
Okay.
It is the top creature according to MTG Goldfish right now at 22%.
That all makes sense, and those are high numbers, but they're not close to half of the field. They're not 100%. They're only that 30% number is even over a quarter, where like the point I was making is like, if you're gonna hurl your deck in the trash because it can't beat Bowmasters, or if you're gonna take some dramatic thing like main decking some hyper specific answer to Bowmasters, you're leaving money on the table in 70+% of matchups you play. Find ways to respect this card without being insane about it, is what I'm saying.
I'm going to take a second and just read the top 10 cards real quick. Top 10 creatures, that is. Orcish Bowmasters in number 1. Number 2 is Brazen Borrower. Number 3 is Murktide Regent. 4 is Plague Engineer. 5 is Fairy Macabre. How crazy is that? 6
That's
is
not a
Containment
creature.
Priest. 7 is Endurance. So 5 through 7 are all graveyard hate. Number 8 is Collector Oof, which stops the One Ring. Number 9 is Simian Spirit Guide. And number 10 is Dragon's Rage Channeler. Delver of Secrets no longer makes the top 10 creatures of Legacy.
Okay, so our top 10 creatures of Legacy, 2 of them are just straight up not creatures, Spirit Guide and Macabre. I mean, sometimes it happens, but we all know that's not why you put it in your deck. And then there's a bunch of backstops like Endurance and Plague Engineer. The only like actual creatures on that list were Murktide Regent and Dragon's Rage Channeler, and then everything else is just some spell that's technically a creature. I think that's kind of cool. I'm not complaining, just pointing out that that's where we are as a society in the Legacy format. Your creatures can't just be creatures, and if they are just creatures, they better be freaking Murktide Regent.
Notably, despite how much we are talking about the One Ring here, it is not in the top 50 cards within the format right now when we just go to spells in Legacy. We are talking about it. It is having an impact. People are still in the adaptation and like learning to play with it and learning to deck build it with it stage.
Yeah, Modern is going through this place right now with the One Ring where it kind of goes like any other busted card. I think the One Ring will be banned shortly after the Modern Pro Tour. There is a Modern PT coming up. People are actively testing for it at this time. I don't think they're going to take any action right away. Also, this set has just been out a few weeks. But I do think the One Ring is out of bounds for Modern. And it's following the pattern of other busted cards in the past, like Oko, where it's like, oh, we could play this one. Let's try it. Let's try 1. And it's like, oh, that was pretty good. Let's play 2. And then it became, oh, wait, snap off the dial at 11 for all decks. Remember when Burn was 5-0ing with Oko in it? That's kind of where the One Ring is headed. Like, One Ring Combo Breach is one of the top decks in Modern right now. Tron is back, built on the back of One Ring. Omnath now has a second set of 4 mana unbeatable payoffs in the One Ring plus Omnath, and that's a Teferi deck that can reset the ring easily. It's also a deck that can play Delighted Halfling and ramp into Omnath or the One Ring. Omnath's life gain offsets the One Ring. This thing is freaking everywhere, and it's hyper toxic in Modern. And my original read was the One Ring is kind of like Uro in that it's probably going to be out of bounds for every format weaker than Legacy and probably okay in Legacy and beyond. And I'm not calling for bans. I'm not turning on the alarm yet. But having seen the One Ring and the slow adaptation of it, it is Uro, but you don't need to play blue and green or go through the graveyard or have a cantrip heavy deck that can fill its graveyard to escape it. It's very stupidly good. And since I got turned onto it, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, every deck that comes through my channel, I'm just like, I think this wants 2 One Rings at the top end. This is a control deck. I'm going to cut all the Jaces and Narcissus and just play 4 One Rings. and all of the decks have improved for it. And that's kind of concerning to me.
I've been watching the tweets from the Paradox Engine Mystic Forge pilots, and they seem to think their deck is very broken, that people need 2 to 3 pieces of interaction relatively early on, or their deck just runs over people.
Yeah, that was true before the One Ring, and now the deck it got hyper focused. This is like Karn the Great, or Karn Liberated was for Tron lands. It's just like, here's the perfect friggin' thing, as if Wizards designed it specifically for what's going on here.
Force of Vigor was the premier removal spell for artifacts and enchantments, and well, it's indestructible. So it gave that deck a way to beat Force of Vigor very easily.
It's also something that survives a meltdown, and if you start gearing towards something like Cast into the Fire to answer the One Ring, then it doesn't answer all the other artifact bullshit. So for example, Cast into the Fire is very good against the One Ring specifically, and hence this deck, but then you get paired against 8 cast, where your 1-for-1 removal spell doesn't keep up with like Thought Casts and Thought Monitors and Emery Recursion and stuff. I felt that artifact hate in sideboard space has often been taxed heavily in trying to respect different things right now.
Yeah, and one big criticism of Cast into the Fire is that the deal damage mode is not fire. It's not split 2 damage among any number of things. It's deals 1 to each of up to 2 creatures. You can't pick off Emery, you can't pick off Stoneforge Mystic. 2 is out of bounds for it. Delated Halfling, same thing. It does not kill a lot of the things that you would like a red removal spell to. We might settle into a place where we realize a Braid was just better all along for that reason. But yeah, One Ring being specifically what it is, it's pretty important to exile it.
To circle back to the top creatures of Legacy, when you look at the top decks in the format, Reanimator stands at the top. Gristlebrand was not in the top 10. And something I've been thinking a lot about is how Reanimator reacts to Orcish Bowmasters.
Oh, baby, it's the Atraxa arc. Bryant is about to tell us how good Atraxa is. I'm so ready for this. Go ahead. Keep talking.
Phil, I wanted you to enjoy this. I'm glad you picked it up early. I think that this is the first time, and Phil ended up being accidentally right, that Atraxa should be seeing more play in Legacy Reanimator. Not being a draw trigger that then deals you 14 damage overall, I think has a lot of value. So if I were someone that really liked putting creatures from my graveyard to the battlefield and making my opponents miserable, I would be looking at maybe an even split between Gristlebrand and Atraxa.
I have an on-camera match where my opponent puts a Grizzlebrand into play. I kind of slump down. I'm like, I can't beat that. They just never activate it, attack me for 7 twice, and I die. And then they activated it. I flashed in Orcish Bowmasters and killed them. And it was just like, oh, well, cool. Like, glad you didn't play around that. Changing paradigms, folks.
Phil got to be right, and I hate it.
Yeah, I mentioned my coaching client who was going to throw his whole deck in the trash over Bowmasters, and it is a Grizzlebrand deck. And one of the things we talked about was like, how about just, settle for your 7/7 lifelink? Don't go ham the second it's in play, because it's a deck that wants to put Grizzlebrand into play, draw 14, and then end the game. And maybe we just don't do that into 2 open mana anymore and enjoy our gigantic idiot.
It's kind of funny if you look back at the last decade and a half of Legacy, there's been a lot of people out there that are like, ban Brainstorm, get it over with, remove Brainstorm from the format, blue decks are too good. And now when you look at the last handful of years, we've received Narset, Hullbreacher, Orcish Bowmasters. Being a Brainstorm gamer has never been worse. Not that Brainstorm's unplayable, but like the card has been kicked down a few levels. And I wonder how those people feel now.
Even before that, Leovold, Spirit of the Labyrinth, WotC has been trickling out. Their anti-Brainstorm agenda has been clear for quite some time now. I have been a Brainstorm gamer basically the whole time, and I feel the squeeze from time to time. I'm still very happy to have Brainstorm in my deck, but yeah, it is settling into a space where it's risky to do.
Twitter has been going through this discourse of what's the best card in Legacy. And a lot of people snap answer Brainstorm. And I've been hearing more and more people go like, yeah, it's probably Ancient Tomb these days, as like people are powering out the One Rings and initiative creatures and all that various stuff.
I don't think I agree with either of those answers, if I'm being honest. It's probably just Force of Will, and it probably always has been Force of Will. But, I mean, those cards are easily 2-3. Like, I think Ancient Tomb is actually underrated.
I'm in the tank about the Force of Will take. Force of Will is only as good as its environment. I can't wait to board out Force of Will when somebody's not presenting a single game-ending spell in their deck. I'm like, okay, good, I could get this horrible card out of my deck. It's just a bad deal unless you're going to freaking die, and you're not going to freaking die unless someone are presenting something broken. So, I don't know. I don't have a result on that line of thinking, but yeah, Force of Will is in a vacuum not a good deal, and in context could be a very good deal, but the context has to be busted. Somebody else is casting something busted, and that's probably a better answer for what the best card is in Legacy than Force of Will.
Well, I happen to be looking at the most played cards in Legacy overall, and Force
That's a
of
different
Will.
thing.
I'm aware, but Force of Will is first in 55% of decks, but there's also 4 copies played overall. And then if you look down at the rest of the list, it's like 3.2, 2.5, 2.2 or whatever. But like everyone agrees, you have to play 4 Force of Will, and it's in 55% of decks. Like over half of the people that play the format think that you need Force of Will. That is why I chose it, not because it's the top played card. It's just like it's ubiquitous. Everyone agrees. Or well, at least 55% of intelligent people agree.
Yeah, everyone agrees that there are a lot of good cards in Legacy, and we need to take our medicine and be able to answer them. They don't necessarily agree that Force of Will is the best one. This will go nowhere. It's just a philosophical question of, in a world where everything's broken, is the thing that stops the broken actually the best thing? Or do we only need that because there are broken things? Like if Force of Will was in Standard, I don't even know if I would put it in my deck. Maybe I don't play Standard, and that's a horrible take, but I don't know. It seems like a bad deal most of the time when formats exist on axes where you could like Doom Blade their thing.
You can also choose to not listen to the guy that chooses the caster Rite of Flame. That's also like an acceptable thing.
That's
I've been
true.
doing that for years.
Ouch.
Phil's a sicko.
Start to approach the tail end of this episode. What sort of things are you thinking about with the format moving forward? Like, we've established some very basic things, like X1 creatures, maybe not something you want to be playing in large numbers. You know, you probably need to have an answer or plan for the One Ring in some capacity, and you maybe want to start thinking about some board wipes or some other way to deal with a bunch of too hasty, tramply creatures. What sort of other things are on your mind in terms of deck building, sideboarding, that sort of stuff that we haven't covered yet?
When you look at the format, obviously Reanimator is everywhere right now, right? And then there's a lot of Bug Scam, and then there's recently a lot of Bowmasters decks. All those things are black, and a lot of them are also blue. What card is good versus black and blue?
Are you going to say Veil of Summer?
There we go, Phil. I'm glad you got there.
I was going to say Great Sable Stag.
Veil of Summer is so good right now, and I think that not enough people are playing it. Like, Brian, I'm not going to tell you how to build your hot bant sideboards, but if I were you, I'd be playing a few Veil of Summers in there at the moment. Like, I think that it needs to go from 0-ish numbers to probably 2-ish numbers.
The problem with Veil of Summer, with specifically Bowmasters, is that it doesn't do anything. I guess it could like fog your shit or fog the Bowmaster trigger for 1 turn, but they still have a big army at the back end of it, and you got to deal with that. I don't know. It just doesn't line up the way that I'd like it to, but I do like the card. I just don't think it helps too much with specifically Bowmaster. It is good abstractly against Reanimator and Scam, though.
Rules moment. Orcish Bowmasters has a trigger, right? So if you cast something like a Veil of Summer and you make the target for Orcish Bowmasters illegal, you are no longer amassing orcs. So paper Magic players, please keep that one in mind.
It does on Magic Online. I'm just going to throw that out there. My opponent's orcs have been getting very large, and then so the trigger happens, their orc gets bigger, and then they keep on picking the same orc because it will never die.
Yeah, that works. What Phil's, and that's what I was talking about before. I guess the way that you would do this, the correct sequencing is you cast your Brainstorm, your opponent orcs, and you should let all the orc triggers go on the stack. But then they get the first ping. So I guess if you get the first ping, I'm trying to think if there's a way that you could give them 0 orcs between a Brainstorm and Veil of Summer. And I don't think there is, because they'll also draw off the Veil of Summer, which could create another ping, and they could just ping their face for the first one and create the army, and then ping the army and grow it for all subsequent pings. Like, you get to stuff one of those along the way, but they'll still get the other 4. But to answer Phil's question here of what am I looking for? I'm looking for more shells for the One Ring. What is the limit on this thing? Is this just any deck that plans on playing 5 or 6 turns of a game should have access to this thing? Is it that stupid? Is that over the line? Are we going to enter an era where control decks just play 2 Ancient Tomb to get your One Ring down a turn earlier? Like, are we just Jeskai control with 2 Ancient Tombs and 3 One Rings? And that's kind of how we're moving forward from here. Does Hull Breacher and Narset, although they are not good for the reasons we described earlier, do we need those to kind of chew up the One Ring? Those cards that are bad with and against Bowmasters, but great against One Ring. There's some interesting tension there. Yeah, I'll be looking for where I can put the One Ring and how I can beat the One Ring in One Ring mirrors.
Brian, you mentioned Ancient Tomb and City of Traders decks. I would agree that the One Ring obviously seems great there, but there's a lot of decks that play those cards that aren't playing it. Like, I haven't seen a single show and tell list that has the One Ring in it, and I think that's actually a decent home for it. A lot of the times with show and tell, you have these soul lands that don't really cast anything in your setup turns because, like, you're choked on blue mana between Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, all that stuff. The One Ring you could accelerate into on turn 2, protects you from an attack that then stabilizes you and draws you 3 cards before you can show and tell, win the game, etc. I think it's actually like a reasonable home there.
Thanks, I hate it.
Yeah, nobody listened to this part of the episode. Turned it off 3 minutes ago.
JPA, you owe me royalties.
Yeah, so I am thinking about like Stony Silences and Collector Oofs a lot right now, because stopping the One Ring's card draw ability is nice, but you also kind of need something that is going to punch decks like 8-Cast and Painter at the same time. Like, those decks will bully you if you don't properly respect them in many cases. I haven't followed its win percentage in the last 2 weeks here, but 8-Cast was putting up just strong results week after week after week and had one of the higher prolonged win percentages in Legacy. And if the hate shifts in a way that deck isn't respected, it's just going to come back stronger than ever.
I do like that Orcish Bowmasters has pushed out decks that I don't like. 8-Cast, Doomsday, Bad Cephalid Breakfast Players. That is the greatest card that's been printed in the last 2 years for specifically Bryant Cook purposes.
Yeah, I was going to say in a less egomaniacal way that Bowmasters is pretty rough for 8-Cast. 8-Cast is a deck that's built on putting a bunch of creatures into play, then drawing a ton of cards, and Bowmasters kills all your creatures when you draw a ton of cards. And while you could go super tall with a single Urza Saga, a pair of 7/7s, never crack your baubles, good luck over there, that just plays harder into the dress down or whatever when you're not keeping that velocity going. Bauble, horrible top deck when you're already behind a Bowmaster. It's a real deck building cost to play baubles these days, as Bryant kind of mentioned earlier. And we didn't talk about it in the context of 8-Cast, but yeah, like if you pop a bauble at any point, your turn or mine, it doesn't matter. When that bauble trigger goes off, I can cast Bowmaster, ping Emery, you draw your card, kill Emery with the second ping. Like, that play pattern is there and cuts one of the core engines out from under that deck. And Bowmasters cost 2, and the Chalice of the Void aspect of the deck gets a lot worse there. So I think 8-Cast is going to adopt the One Ring.
I mean, that's another one. Ancient Tomb deck. Put it in.
Yep. Yeah, just Ancient Tomb, Bauble, Lotus Petal, Mox Opal, One Ring, go. That's the play pattern.
I'm also surprised I haven't seen the One Ring in higher numbers in Painter. Some of the top 8 lists have just not had it, or had it as like a 2 of. And I'm just surprised that it's that low. Like, maybe they don't have the life gain to offset it or whatever, but they have ways to like weld it in and out of play.
Yeah, that seems amazing. But also, they're a deck that gets to play Bowmasters too. So you get to be the One Ring deck that also has Orcish Bowmasters. Phil, you've solved Legacy.
I honestly think that Grixis control with a One Ring Shouldered top end and Bowmasters and a ton of interaction at the low end might have legs here. When Hidetsugu Consumes All was printed, that kind of plugged a bunch of gaps that Grixis had in the metagame. And while that card kind of sucks now, Bowmasters does a lot of the work that it would be doing. And I think there is a well-constructed Grixis deck with 3 One Rings and 2 Shouldereds. Minimum. There might be more of each, but start with a 3 and 2 at the top end and figure out the other 55 cards, because I think that's really good.
All right. Do we have any closing thoughts here? Just any final words of wisdom or caution that we want to impart on our listeners?
Don't be afraid to adapt. It's okay to set down some cards that you were in love with in 2016, like Portent and Preordain, Play the One Ring, play the good cards, you'll win more. And I'm sorry that those cards are no longer playable.
We on this podcast, especially Bryant, are always pretty firm on no deck deserves to be viable. I know it sucks when you invest in a legacy deck and maybe a new printing makes it a lot worse. If you want to succeed in the format, you got to be ready to move. And we're in a big time of motion right now.
I guess the final thing that I'd like to say here is the format might be changing, or you might even say warping around these cards that we talked about today. But the gameplay is awesome. Like every time that I have sat down for Legacy Leagues, like I have really enjoyed the gameplay, with the exceptions of the time that I played a deck that just was not prepared to face Orcish Bowmasters and my 1/1s got bullied for 3 hours while I recorded. That was on me for playing that, not on the gameplay experience itself. That was me not adapting.
Agreed. From a gameplay quality perspective, I would rather my opponent spend 2 mana on Orcish Bowmasters than Chalice of the Void. And all sorts of nonsense that we're used to as Legacy players. Orcish Bowmasters does not pass the bullshit bar. It passes the playables bar. It leaps dramatically over the playable bar, but it's not bullshit. Not in the way that Wasteland and Chalice of the Void and Show and Tell and all these things that we're very used to playing against are. I have been asked by a number of people, like, should I just wait out for the ban? And I think no, because I don't think this card's going to get banned. At least it's not on the radar yet. We'll see how things go. If anything we've talked about is anywhere near a ban radar, it's the One Ring, and it's in Modern. And we'll see if that trickles down to Legacy, but I think our format is a little better at handling a 4-drop that doesn't immediately change the game.